Chapter 1: The Midnight Visitor. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the wooden desk as Abraham Lincoln ran his fingers over a classified document. His eyes, weary yet sharp, darted across the parchment. It was 1863, and the nation was embroiled in the bloodiest war in American history, the Civil War. But this document spoke of a threat unlike any he had encountered before. A knock on the White House door startled him. It was past midnight, and few knew of his whereabouts at this hour. He stood, adjusting his coat, and answered. A hooded figure stepped inside. "Mr. President," the man whispered, "it has begun." Lincoln narrowed his eyes. He had hoped this moment would never come. But deep down, he always knew it was inevitable. Chapter 2: A Nation at Risk. For months, Lincoln had received cryptic warnings, letters delivered with no sender, messages coded in the margins of old war reports. Each hinted at a hidden force, operating beyond the battlefield, seeking to collapse the Union from within. This night's visitor was Allan Pinkerton, the legendary detective who had foiled an assassination attempt against Lincoln years before. "What did you find?" Lincoln asked. Pinkerton handed him a sealed letter. "It's worse than we imagined. The Confederates aren't working alone. There's an underground faction, deeply embedded in Washington. Their leader, unknown. Their reach, immeasurable. Their plan, catastrophic." Lincoln's heart pounded. He had fought to keep the Union together through bloodshed and strife, but now, he would have to fight in the shadows. "I need to see it for myself," Lincoln said, standing tall. Pinkerton's eyes widened. "Sir, this is too dangerous." Lincoln smirked. "You forget, Allan, I wasn't always a politician." Chapter 3: The Journey South. Disguised as a humble traveler in a ragged coat and wide-brimmed hat, Lincoln boarded a train heading toward Confederate territory. Few would recognize him without his presidential attire, but the risk was still immense. By his side was Frederick Douglass, the famed abolitionist. Douglass had been tracking similar threats in the South, whispers of a powerful Confederate secret society known as the Serpent's Hand. They were rumored to be hunting something far older than the war itself, an artifact of great power, hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient settlement. As the train rattled toward the unknown, Douglass turned to Lincoln. "If they find us, they will kill us." Lincoln's gaze was steady. "Then we won't let them find us." Chapter 4: The Ruins of Cahokia. Their journey led them deep into the heart of Missouri, to an ancient site long forgotten, Cahokia, the remains of a civilization older than the founding fathers themselves. Under the cover of night, they slipped into the ruins, where torches flickered in the distance. Lincoln and Douglass crouched low, watching a group of men in Confederate gray gathered in a circle. At the center of the group stood a massive iron chest, its surface etched with symbols neither man recognized. "What is that?" Douglass whispered. Lincoln's breath hitched. "Something they shouldn't have." Suddenly, a voice rang out. "The North will fall, and the power of the ancients will be ours." Lincoln felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just about the war anymore. It was about something far greater. Chapter 5: The Battle Beneath the Earth. Before Lincoln could react, an explosion erupted in the distance. Pinkerton's agents had launched their assault. Chaos ensued, Confederate guards drew their weapons, smoke filled the air, and the ground shook as gunfire echoed through the ruins. Lincoln and Douglass charged forward. Lincoln, despite his tall frame, moved swiftly. He tackled one of the guards, using his sheer strength to knock the man unconscious. Douglass, armed with a concealed dagger, disarmed another before turning to Lincoln. "We need to destroy that chest." But before they could reach it, a figure emerged from the shadows, the leader of the Serpent's Hand. He was no ordinary man. His eyes glowed an unnatural shade of gold. "I have waited long for this," he said. Then, with an inhuman roar, he lunged at Lincoln. Chapter 6: The Final Stand. Lincoln barely had time to react. The man moved too fast, his strength unnatural. Lincoln dodged, narrowly avoiding the strike. But the Serpent's Hand leader was relentless. "This land belonged to them long before your war," the man hissed. "We are merely reclaiming what was lost." Douglas leaped forward, slashing at the man's arm, but the wound healed instantly. Lincoln had one shot. He grabbed a fallen torch and plunged it toward the iron chest. If he couldn't fight the man, he could destroy what he was after. The moment the flame touched the chest, a blinding light burst forth. The Serpent's Hand leader screamed as the ancient power turned against him. The ground beneath them collapsed. Chapter 7: The Escape and the Legacy. When Lincoln and Douglas awoke, they were back on Union soil, with Pinkerton at their side. The Confederate operation had been destroyed, the artifact lost beneath the ruins. "Did we win?" Douglas asked. Lincoln, bruised but victorious, looked at the rising sun. "For now." He knew the war was far from over. But what mattered was that he had fought, not just for the present, but for the future. Little did the world know, Abraham Lincoln's greatest battles were not only fought on the battlefield, but in the shadows, where history never recorded them. Chapter 8: The Shadows of Washington. Abraham Lincoln sat in the Oval Office, his wounds barely healed from the battle beneath Cahokia. The weight of what he had seen pressed heavily on his mind. The war was raging, and though he had dealt a crippling blow to the Serpent's Hand, he knew they were not truly defeated. A coded telegram arrived on his desk. It was from Allan Pinkerton. "Sir, the Confederates are not acting alone. There's another force at play. Meet me at the Washington Navy Yard at midnight. Tell no one." Lincoln exhaled, his breath slow and measured. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous battles were often the ones history would never record. He reached into his desk and pulled out a revolver. This was not just a war for the Union. It was a war for the very soul of the nation. Chapter 9: The Assassin's Trap. Under the cover of darkness, Lincoln arrived at the Washington Navy Yard, his coat pulled tightly against the night's cold wind. The streets were eerily empty, too empty. Then, a shadow moved. Lincoln barely had time to react before a knife whistled through the air. He dodged, the blade slicing through his coat. An assassin. A second attack came, a gunshot. Lincoln dived behind a stack of barrels. "Step out, Mr. President," a voice taunted from the darkness. "We've been waiting for you." Lincoln recognized the voice. It was John Wilkes Booth. Chapter 10: The Confederate Conspiracy. Booth emerged from the shadows, his pistol aimed directly at Lincoln. "You're meddling in affairs you don't understand," he sneered. Lincoln smirked. "You're a failed actor trying to play the role of a patriot." "Who sent you?" Booth's smirk faded. He knew Lincoln was no ordinary politician. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, stepping closer. "The Confederacy isn't just fighting for states' rights or slavery. We are fighting for power beyond anything you can imagine." Before Booth could pull the trigger, a gunshot rang out. Pinkerton had arrived. Booth staggered back, gripping his bleeding shoulder. Snarling, he turned and vanished into the shadows. Pinkerton ran up. "Are you hurt?" Lincoln dusted himself off. "Not yet. But I fear we've only seen the beginning of this war." Pinkerton handed Lincoln a document. "We intercepted a message meant for Jefferson Davis. The serpent's hand isn't the only force at play. There's something even darker moving through this war." Lincoln took the paper. His eyes darkened as he read. "The Order of the Black Sun is awakening. The relic must not fall into Lincoln's hands. He must be eliminated before the eclipse." Lincoln clenched his jaw. "Then we leave at once." "To where?" Pinkerton asked. Lincoln turned toward the White House. Gettysburg. Chapter 11, The War for the Relic. Lincoln, Pinkerton, and a small team of trusted men rode through the Pennsylvania countryside under the cover of night. The Battle of Gettysburg had already begun, but Lincoln knew this was more than just another skirmish. It was a cover-up for something more sinister. Hidden beneath the battlefield was an ancient chamber, one that the Confederacy and the Order of the Black Sun sought to unlock. As cannon fire thundered in the distance, Lincoln and his team infiltrated the ruins beneath Gettysburg. What they found shook them to their core. At the heart of the underground chamber stood a stone monolith, pulsing with an eerie blue light. Around it, Confederate officers and robed figures chanted in a language long forgotten by time. Douglas, who had accompanied them, whispered, "They're waking something up." Lincoln knew they had to act. Now. Chapter 12, The Awakening. Lincoln raised his rifle and fired the first shot. The explosion shattered the silence, and his men charged. Gunfire erupted, echoing through the ancient stone walls. Pinkerton took down a Confederate sorcerer mid-chant, while Douglas engaged an enemy officer in close combat. Lincoln, however, had one target, the leader of the Black Sun Order. As the man raised his hands toward the monolith, the chamber began to shake. Stone crumbled, and a giant shadow emerged. Lincoln tackled the leader, knocking him off balance. "Your war ends tonight." But the man laughed. "You fool," he hissed. "The relic has already chosen a side." Then, the monolith cracked open. Chapter 13, The Final Stand. A creature, a being of pure darkness, began to emerge. It was ancient, powerful, and very much alive. Lincoln grabbed a torch and turned to Douglas. "We can't let it escape." Pinkerton fired his revolver at the monolith, causing another crack to form. The creature roared, its power unstable. Lincoln made a decision. He grabbed a bundle of dynamite from Pinkerton's pack, lit it, and hurled it toward the monolith. "Get down!" The explosion rocked the ruins, sending shockwaves through the battlefield above. As the dust settled, the monolith was destroyed. The creature was gone. The war above raged on, but Lincoln had ensured that the true threat had been buried forever. Chapter 14, The Price of Victory. As they emerged from the ruins, Lincoln turned to Douglas. "We won today. But what else is hidden in this land?" Douglas wiped the dirt from his face. "I don't know. But if there's more, we'll fight it." Pinkerton nodded. "The Confederacy and the Black Sun may have lost this battle, but they won't stop here." Lincoln gazed at the blood-soaked fields of Gettysburg, the sounds of war still raging. He had fought an enemy the world would never know existed. But he knew this was only the beginning. Because war was not just fought with bullets and swords. It was fought in the shadows, against forces far older than the nation itself. And as long as he drew breath, Abraham Lincoln would stand against them all. Chapter 15, The Secrets Beneath the White House. Days after the Battle of Gettysburg, Lincoln sat in his study, his fingers tracing the edges of a weathered leather-bound book, one that had been recovered from the ruins beneath Gettysburg. The book's title had long faded, but its pages told a story far older than the United States itself. The Order of the Black Sun was not defeated. If anything, the destruction of the monolith had only delayed their true plan. A knock on his door pulled Lincoln from his thoughts. It was Edwin Stanton, his Secretary of War and one of the few people he trusted. "Mr. President," Stanton said, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." Lincoln gestured to a seat, but Stanton remained standing. "The Confederates are still on the move. Their forces are retreating, but we intercepted a message, one that suggests they're headed somewhere unexpected." "Where?" Stanton exhaled. "Washington." Lincoln's eyes darkened. "They wouldn't dare march on the Capitol." Stanton hesitated. "Not above ground." Lincoln sat forward. "Explain." Stanton pulled out an old map of Washington, D.C., pointing to an area beneath the city. "There's a network of tunnels underneath the White House. Some date back to the War of 1812, but others." His voice trailed off. Lincoln studied the map. "You're saying the Confederacy and the Black Sun are coming here?" "To the tunnels." Stanton nodded grimly. "And I think I know why." Chapter 16, The Tomb Below Washington. Lincoln, Stanton, and a small team of Pinkerton agents entered the tunnels at midnight, each man carrying a rifle and a torch. The air was damp, the walls lined with symbols Lincoln had only seen in ancient texts. "This isn't just an escape tunnel," Pinkerton murmured. "It's something much older." As they moved deeper, the walls became smoother, polished, as if shaped by hands far more advanced than those of early American settlers. Then, they found it. A massive iron door, its surface engraved with markings identical to those on the monolith at Gettysburg. Lincoln turned to Stanton. "Whatever's behind this door, we can't let them have it." But before they could act, they heard footsteps. Lincoln raised his hand, signaling his men to hold their ground. Through the dim torchlight, a Confederate officer emerged. He was flanked by two robed figures. One of them stepped forward, lowering his hood. It was John Wilkes Booth. "You should have stayed out of this, Mr. President," Booth sneered. "But since you're here, perhaps you'd like to see the true power we've been after." He reached into his coat and pulled out a key, one that pulsed with a faint, golden glow. Before Lincoln could react, Booth shoved the key into the door's lock and turned it. Chapter 17, The Awakening of the First King. A deep rumble shook the tunnels as the iron door groaned open. The torches flickered violently as a gust of unnatural air rushed out. Beyond the doorway was a massive chamber. At its center, surrounded by chains of pure silver, lay a stone sarcophagus. Its lid bore the image of a man, clad in armor unlike any Lincoln had ever seen. His eyes, though carved in stone, seemed to watch them. Booth grinned. "The South doesn't need an army, Mr. President." He gestured to the sarcophagus. "We just need him." Lincoln raised his revolver. "Step away from it." Booth ignored him, whispering something in a language long dead. The symbols on the sarcophagus began to glow. Then, the lid cracked. The room shook violently as an inhuman roar echoed through the chamber. Lincoln steadied himself as the sarcophagus shattered, revealing the figure within. A man, no, something more than a man, rose from the tomb. His skin was pale as marble, his eyes burning with blue fire. The first king had awakened. And he was not pleased. Chapter 18, The Battle for the Republic. Booth fell to his knees, his arms raised in worship. "My lord, the South has called you forth to." The first king moved faster than anyone could react. He grabbed Booth by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "The South?" the king rumbled, his voice like crushing stone. I serve no nation of men. With a single squeeze, Booth's body crumbled to dust. The king turned his gaze toward Lincoln. You are different. Lincoln held his ground. I serve the people, the nation, and I will not let you destroy it. The king laughed, a deep, ominous sound. We shall see. Then, with a wave of his hand, the tunnels collapsed. Chapter 19, The President versus the First King. Lincoln and his men barely escaped as the chamber crumbled. The king was free, and he was heading toward the city. As dawn broke, Washington, D.C., trembled. The first king emerged from the tunnels, his colossal form towering over the White House. Soldiers opened fire, but bullets had no effect. Then, Lincoln stepped forward. He pulled something from inside his coat. The book from Gettysburg. Flipping to a marked page, he raised his hand and spoke the ancient words inscribed in its pages. The sky darkened. The ground shook. The first king staggered. You know the old tongue? The king growled. Lincoln narrowed his eyes. I know enough. Then, he threw the book into the air and fired a single shot through its pages. The words ignited, releasing a torrent of light and fire. The first king screamed as chains of pure energy wrapped around him, pulling him back toward the earth. With one final, earth-shattering roar, the king was sealed away once more, this time, forever. Chapter 20, The Legacy of the Shadow War. Days later, Lincoln stood in the ruins of the collapsed tunnels, Pinkerton and Douglas at his side. Is it over? Pinkerton asked. Lincoln nodded. For now. Douglas adjusted his coat. What do we do if something like this happens again? Lincoln smiled grimly. We fight. And we make sure the world never knows. As he walked away, he glanced up at the Capitol, its dome still standing tall. The nation had survived. But deep down, Lincoln knew the war against the darkness was far from over. And he would be ready. Chapter 21, The Final War Beneath America. For months after sealing away the first king, Lincoln remained vigilant. He suspected that the Order of the Black Sun was still operating in the shadows, searching for another way to seize power. And he was right. One evening, as he was drafting a speech for Congress, a sealed letter arrived on his desk. The wax bore an emblem that made his blood run cold, the same sigil found beneath Gettysburg and on the sarcophagus of the first king. He broke the seal and unfolded the parchment. The message was written in an ancient dialect. The first king was only the beginning. The true master has yet to rise. When he does, no seal, no chains, no words of power will hold him. The Union will fall. The world will kneel. The shadow war is not over. Lincoln exhaled slowly. The final battle was coming. Chapter 22, The Return of the Forgotten One. Through Pinkerton intelligence, Lincoln learned that remnants of the order were gathering in Cahokia, an ancient site of the Mississippian civilization. Historians thought it was merely an abandoned city. But Lincoln now knew the truth. It was a burial ground for something far older than America itself. Alongside Frederick Douglass, Allan Pinkerton, and a group of elite Union soldiers, Lincoln journeyed west, disguised as a simple traveler. They arrived at Cahokia at dusk, its great mounds casting long shadows over the landscape. But Lincoln could feel it, a pulse beneath the earth. Something was waiting. Under the cover of darkness, they infiltrated the largest mound, where the order had gathered. And there, beneath the earth, they found the ritual in progress. A massive stone altar loomed in the center of an underground cavern, surrounded by hooded figures chanting in a tongue not spoken for thousands of years. In the altar's center lay a colossal stone figure, even taller than the first king. Its eyes were shut, its body wrapped in chains of glowing metal. "Their true master," Douglas murmured. "The one they truly serve." One of the hooded men turned, his face was half covered in arcane tattoos, his eyes glowing with black fire. "The president himself comes to witness the rebirth of the Forgotten One," the man sneered. "How fitting." Lincoln stepped forward, revolver drawn. "You're making a mistake. Whatever is sealed here, it was meant to stay that way." The man laughed, raising a dagger above his head. "You cannot stop destiny." Before he could plunge the dagger into the stone figure's chest, Lincoln fired. The shot struck the man dead center, but instead of falling, he let out a howl of laughter as his body burned away into black smoke. The altar shook violently. The stone figure's eyes snapped open. The Forgotten One had awakened. Chapter 23, Lincoln's Last Stand. The cavern collapsed as the entity rose, its towering form breaking free of the chains meant to bind it for eternity. Its voice shook the world. "You are not worthy to stand before me." The Union soldiers opened fire, but bullets vanished before reaching its form. Lincoln grabbed the book from Gettysburg, flipping desperately through its pages. "There must be another way to bind it," he yelled. Pinkerton fired another shot, but Douglas grabbed his arm. "Bullets won't work. We have to seal it again." Lincoln's eyes darted across the ancient text. Then he found it. The only way to stop the Forgotten One. It required a willing sacrifice. Chapter 24, The Greatest Sacrifice. Lincoln took a slow breath, then turned to Douglas. "You have to be the one to finish the ritual." Douglas frowned. "What are you saying?" Lincoln tightened his grip on the book. "Someone must channel the power of the spell. Someone must bind the Forgotten One, permanently." Douglas paled. "Lincoln, if you do this." Lincoln smiled. "Then I finally earn my place in history." Before anyone could stop him, Lincoln stepped forward, raising the book. The words of power flowed from his lips, echoing through the chamber. The Forgotten One staggered, its colossal form trembling as Lincoln chanted. Then, as the last word left his mouth, a pillar of golden light erupted from the earth, engulfing the monstrous entity. The cavern shook violently. The order screamed as they were obliterated by the force of the sealing ritual. Lincoln stood at the center of it all, his body glowing with the same golden energy that now bound the Forgotten One. Douglas reached for him. "Lincoln, no!" But Lincoln only smiled. "Take care of the Republic, Frederick." Then, in a blinding flash, he was gone. The cavern collapsed completely, sealing away the Forgotten One, and Abraham Lincoln along with it. Epilogue: The man who became a legend. Months later, the country mourned the loss of its greatest leader. The history books would claim Lincoln had been assassinated at Ford's Theater. But Douglas, Pinkerton, and a few others knew the truth. Lincoln hadn't died that night in Washington. He had sacrificed himself to save the world. As Douglas stood before the White House, looking up at its towering facade, he whispered, "Thank you, Mr. President." Somewhere beneath the earth, beyond time and space, Abraham Lincoln still stood watch, ensuring that the Forgotten One would never rise again. And if the day ever came when the seal weakened, he would be ready.